Shalom, shalom, and welcome back to another session of Sister for Sister Story Time with your favorite her historian, Sister Chaya. We are currently reading the book. Look, I don't forget the Secret Teachings of All Ages. Let me put the thing up here by Manly P. Hall. The book is, if you want to purchase it, it's in the description box. And I'm going to share my screen and go ahead and start reading. The Orphic Egg. From Bryant's An Analysis of Ancient Mythology, the ancient symbol of the Orphic mysteries was the serpent-entwined egg, which signified cosmos as encircled by the fiery creative spirit. The egg also represents the soul of the philosopher, the serpent, the mysteries. At the time of initiation, the shell is broke, and man emerges from the embryonic state of physical existence wherein he had remained through the fetal period of philosophic regeneration. The ancient mysteries and secret societies, which have influenced modern Masonic symbolism. When confronted with the problem involving the use of the reasoning faculties, individuals of strong intellect keep their poise and seek to reach a solution by obtaining facts bearing upon the question. Those of immature mentality, on the other hand, when similarly confronted, are overwhelmed. While the former may be qualified to solve the riddle of their own destiny, the latter must be led like a flock of sheep and taught in simple language. They depend almost entirely upon the ministrations of the shepherd. The Apostle Paul said that these little ones must be fed with milk, but that meat is the food of strong men. Thoughtlessness is almost synonymous with childishness, while thoughtfulness is symbolic of maturity. There are, however, but few mature minds in the world, and thus it was that the philosophic religious doctrines of the pagans were divided to meet the needs of these two fundamental groups of human intellect. One philosophic, the other incapable of appreciating the deeper mysteries of life. To the discerning few were revealed the esoteric or spiritual teachings, while the unqualified many received only the literal or exoteric interpretations. In order to make simple the great truths of nature and the abstract principles of natural law, the vital forces of the universe were personified, becoming the gods and goddesses of the ancient mythologies, while the ignorant multitudes brought their offerings to the altars of Priapus and Pan, deities representing the procreative energies. The wise recognized in these marble statues only symbolic concretions of great abstract truths. In all cities of the ancient world were temples for public worship and offering. In every community also were philosophers and mystics deeply versed in nature's lore. These individuals were usually banded together, forming seclusive philosophic and religious schools. The more important of these groups were known as the mysteries. Many of the great minds of antiquity were initiated into these secret fraternities by strange and mysterious rites, some of which were extremely cruel. Alexander Wilder defines the mysteries as sacred dramas performed at stated periods. The most celebrated were those of Isis, Sabazius, Sybil, and Ulysses. After being admitted, the initiates were instructed in the secret wisdom which had been preserved for ages. Plato, an initiate of one of these sacred orders, was severely criticized because in his writings he revealed to the public many of these secret philosophic principles of the mysteries. Every pagan nation had and has not only its state religion, but another into which the philosophic elect alone have gained entrance. Many of these ancient cults vanished from the earth without revealing their secrets, but a few have survived the test of ages, and their mysterious symbols are still preserved. Much of the ritualism of Freemasonry is based on the trials to which candidates were subjected by the ancient hierophants before the keys of wisdom were entrusted to them. Few realize the extent to which the ancient secret schools influenced contemporary intellects. Oh, let me reshare. Okay. Few realize the extent to which the ancient secret schools influenced contemporary intellects and, through those minds, posterity. Robert McCoy, 33 Degrees, in his General History of Freemasonry, pays a magnificent tribute to the part played by ancient mysteries in the rearing of the edifice of human culture. He says, in part, it appears that all the perfection of civilization and all the advancement made in philosophy, science, and art among the ancients are due to those institutions which, under the veil of mystery, sought to illustrate the sublimest truths of religion, morality, and virtue, and impress them on the hearts of their disciples. Their chief object was to teach the doctrine of one God, the resurrection of man to eternal life, the dignity of the human soul, and to lead the people to see the shadow of the deity in the beauty, magnificence, and splendor of the universe. With the decline of virtue, which has preceded the destruction of every nation of history, the mysteries became perverted. Sorcery took the place of the divine magic. Indescribable practices such as the bacchanalia were introduced, and perversion ruled supreme. For no institution can be any better than the members of which it is composed. In despair, the few who were true sought to preserve the secret doctrines from oblivion. In some cases, they succeeded, but more often the arcanum was lost and only the empty shell of the mysteries remained. Thomas Taylor has written, "Man is naturally a religious animal." From the earliest dawning of his consciousness, man has worshipped and revered things as symbolic of the invisible, omnipresent, indescribable thing concerning which he could discover practically nothing. The pagan mysteries opposed the Christians during the early centuries of their church, declaring that the new faith, Christianity, did not demand virtue and integrity as requisites for salvation. Celsus expressed himself on the subject in the following caustic terms: that I do not, however, accuse the Christians more bitterly than truth compels, may be conjectured from hence that the criers who call men to other mysteries proclaim as follows: let him approach whose hands are pure and whose words are wise. And again, others proclaim, let him approach who is pure from all wickedness, whose soul is not conscious of any evil, and who leads a just and upright life. And these things are proclaimed by those who promise a purification from error. Let us now hear who those are that are called to the Christian mysteries. Whoever is a sinner, whoever is unwise, whoever is a fool, and whoever in short is miserable, him the kingdom of God will receive. Do you not therefore call a sinner, an unjust man, a thief, a housebreaker, a wizard, one who is sacrilegious, and a robber of sepulchres? What other persons would the crier nominate? Who should call robbers together? It was not the true faith of the early Christian mystics that Celsus attacked, but the false forms that were creeping in even during his day. The ideals of early Christianity were based upon the high moral standards of the pagan mysteries, and the first Christians who met under the city of Rome used as their places of worship the subterranean temples of Mithras, from whose cult has been borrowed much of the sacerdotalism of the modern church. The ancient philosophers believed that no man could live intelligently who did not have a fundamental knowledge of nature and her laws. Before man can obey, he must understand, and the mysteries were devoted to instructing man concerning the operation of divine law in the terrestrial sphere. Few of the early cults actually worshipped anthropomorphic deities, although their symbolism might lead one to believe they did. They were moralistic rather than religionistic, philosophic rather than theologic. They taught man to use his faculties more intelligently, to be patient in the face of adversity, to be courageous when confronted by danger, to be true in the midst of temptation, and, most of all, to view a worthy life as the most acceptable sacrifice to God, and his body as an altar sacred to the deity. The female Hierophant of the Mysteries, from Montfaucon's Antiquities. This illustration shows Sybil, here called the Syrian goddess, in the robes of a Hierophant. Montfaucon describes the figure as follows. Upon her head is an episcopal mitre, adorned on the lower part with towers and pinnacles. Over the gate of the city is a crescent, and beneath the circuit of the walls a crown of rays. The goddess wears a sort of surplice, exactly like the surplice of a priest or bishop, and upon the surplice a tunic, which falls down to the legs, and overall an episcopal cope, with the 12 signs of the zodiac wrought on the borders. The figure hath a lion on each side, and holds in its left hand a tympanum, a sistrum, a distaff, a caduceus, and another instrument. In her right hand she holds with her middle finger a thunderbolt, and upon the same animals, insects, and, as far as we may guess, flowers, fruit, a bow, a quiver, a torch, and a scythe. The whereabouts of the statue is unknown, the copy reproduced by Montfaucon being from drawings by Piero Liguorio. Sun worship played an important part in nearly all the early pagan mysteries. This indicates the probability of their Atlantean origin, for the people of Atlantis were sun worshippers. The solar deity was usually personified as a beautiful youth with long golden hair to symbolize the rays of the sun. The golden sun was slain by wicked ruffians who personified the evil principle of the universe. By means of certain rituals and ceremonies, symbolic of purification and regeneration, this wonderful God of good was brought back to life and became the savior of his people. The secret processes whereby he was resurrected symbolize those cultures by means of which man is able to overcome his lower nature, master his appetites, and give expression to the higher side of himself. The mysteries were organized for the purpose of assisting the struggling human creature to reawaken the spiritual powers which, surrounded by the flaming ring of lust and degeneracy, lay asleep within his soul. In other words, man was offered a way by which he could regain his lost estate. In the ancient world, nearly all the secret societies were philosophic and religious. During the medieval centuries, they were chiefly religious and political, although a few philosophic schools remained. In modern times, secret societies in the Occidental countries are largely political or fraternal, although in a few of them, as in Masonry, the ancient religious and philosophic principles still survive. Space prohibits a detailed discussion of the secret schools. There were literally scores of these ancient cults with branches in all parts of the Eastern and Western worlds. Some, such as those of Pythagoras and the Hermetists, show a decided Oriental influence, while the Rosicrucians, according to their own proclamations, gained much of their wisdom from Arabian mystics. Although the mystery schools are usually associated with civilization, there is evidence that the most uncivilized peoples of prehistoric times had a knowledge of them. Natives of distant islands, many in the lowest forms of savagery, have mystic rituals and secret practices which, although primitive, are of a decided Masonic tinge. The Druidic mysteries of Britain and Gaul. The original and primitive inhabitants of Britain at some remote period revived and reformed their national institutes. Their priest or instructor had hitherto been simply named Gwyd, but it was considered to have become necessary to divide this office between the national or superior priest and another whose influence would be more limited. From henceforth, the former became Druid or superior instructor, and the latter Goed or Ovate, subordinate instructor, and both went by the general name of Beard or Bards or teachers of wisdom. As the system matured and augmented, the bardic order consisted of three classes: the Druids, bird branked or privileged bards, and ovates. The origin of the word druid is under dispute. Max Muller believes that, like the Irish word druid, it means the men of the oak trees. He further draws attention to the fact that the forest gods and tree deities of the Greeks were called dryads. Some believe the word to be of Teutonic origin, others ascribe it to the Welsh. A few trace it to the Gallic druid, which means a wise man or a sorcerer. In Sanskrit, the word Dru means timber. At the time of the Roman conquest, the Druids were thoroughly ensconced in Britain and Gaul. Their power over the people was unquestioned, and there were instances in which armies about to attack each other sheathed their swords when ordered to do so by the white-robed Druids. No undertaking of great importance was scattered without the assistance of these patriarchs, who stood as mediators between the gods and men. The Druidic order is deservedly credited with having had a deep understanding of nature and her laws. The Encyclopedia Britannica states that geography, physical science, natural theology, and astrology were their favorite studies. The Druids had a fundamental knowledge of medicine, especially the use of herbs and simples. Crude surgical instruments also have been found in England and Ireland. An odd treatise on early British medicine states that every practitioner was expected to have a garden or backyard for the growing of certain herbs necessary to his profession. Eliphas Levi, the celebrated transcendentalist, makes the following significant statement. The Druids were priests and physicians, curing by magnetism and charging amulets with their fluidic influence. Their universal remedies were mistletoe and serpent's eggs because these substances attract the astral light in a special manner. The solemnity with which mistletoe was cut down drew upon this plant the popular confidence and rendered it powerfully magnetic. The progress of magnetism will someday reveal to us the absorbing properties of mistletoe. We shall then understand the secret of those spongy growths which drew the unused virtues of plants and become surcharged with tinctures and savors, mushrooms, truffles, gall on trees, and the different kinds of mistletoe will be employed with understanding by a medical science, which will be new because it is old, but one must not move quicker than science, which recedes that it may advance the further. See the history of magic. Not only was the mistletoe sacred as symbolic of the universal medicine or panacea, but also because of the fact that it grew upon the oak tree. Through the symbol of the oak, the Druids worshiped the supreme deity. Therefore, anything growing upon that tree was sacred to him. At certain seasons, according to the positions of the sun, moon, and stars, the archdruid climbed the oak tree and cut the mistletoe with a golden sickle consecrated for that service. The parasitic growth was caught in white cloths provided for the purpose, lest it touch the earth and be polluted by terrestrial vibrations. Usually a sacrifice of a white bull was made under the tree. The Druids were initiates of a secret school that existed in their midst. This school, which closely resembled the Bacchic and Eleusinian mysteries of Greece or the Egyptian rites of Isis and Osiris, is justly designated the Druidic mysteries. There has been much speculation concerning the secret wisdom that the Druids claimed to possess. Their secret teachings were never written but were communicated orally to specially prepared candidates. Robert Brown, 32nd degree, is of the opinion that the British priests secured their information from Tyrian and Phoenician navigators who, thousands of years before the Christian era, established colonies in Britain and Gaul while searching for tin. Thomas Maurice, in his Indian Antiquities, discourses at length on Phoenician, Carthaginian, and Greek expeditions to the British Isles for the purpose of procuring tin. Others are of the opinion that the mysteries as celebrated by the Druids were of Oriental origin, possibly Buddhistic. The proximity of the British Isles to the lost Atlantis may account for the sun worship, which plays an important part in the rituals of Druidism. According to Artemidorus, Ceres and Persephone were worshipped on an island close to Britain with rites and ceremonies similar to those of Samothrace. There is no doubt that the Druidic pantheon includes a large number of Greek and Roman deities. This greatly amazed Caesar during his conquest of Britain and Gaul, and caused him to affirm that these tribes adored Mercury, Apollo, Mars, and Jupiter in a manner similar to that of the Latin countries. It is almost certain that the Druidic mysteries were not indigenous to Britain or Gaul, but migrated from one of the more ancient civilizations. The school of the Druids was divided into three distinct parts, and the secret teachings embodied therein are practically the same as the mysteries concealed under the allegories of Blue Lodge masonry. The lowest of the three divisions was that of Ovid or Ovid. This was an honorary degree requiring no special purification or preparation. The Ovids dressed in green, the Druidic color of learning, and were expected to know something about medicine, astronomy, poetry if possible, and sometimes music. An Ovid was an individual admitted to the Druidic order because of his general excellence and superior knowledge concerning the problems of life. The second division was that of Bard. Its members were robed in sky blue to represent harmony and truth, and to them was assigned the labor of memorizing, at least in part, the 20,000 verses of Druidic sacred poetry. They were often pictured with the primitive British or Irish harp, an instrument strung with human hair and having as many strings as there were ribs on one side of the human body. These bards were often chosen as teachers of candidates seeking entrance into the Druidic mysteries. Neophytes wore striped robes of blue, green, and white, these being the three sacred colors of the Druidic order. The third division was that of Druidon. Its particular labor was to minister to the religious needs of the people. To reach this dignity, the candidate must first become a bard brant. The Druids always dressed in white, symbolic of their purity and the color used by them to symbolize the sun. In order to reach the exalted position of Archdruid, or spiritual head of the organization, it was necessary for a priest to pass through the 6 successive degrees of the Druidic order. The members of the different degrees were differentiated by the colors of their sashes, for all of them wore robes of white. Some writers are of the opinion that the title of Archdruid was hereditary, descending from father to son, but it is more probable that the honor was conferred by ballot election. Its recipient was chosen for his virtues and integrity from the most learned members of the higher Druidic degrees. According to James Gardner, there were usually 2 Archdruids in Britain, one residing on the Isle of Anglesea and the other on the Isle of Man. Presumably, there were others in Gaul. These dignitaries generally carried golden scepters and were crowned with wreaths of oak leaves, symbolic of their authority. The younger members of the Druidic order were clean-shaven and modestly dressed, but the more aged had long gray beards and wore magnificent golden ornaments. The educational system of the Druids in Britain was superior to that of their colleagues on the continent, and consequently many of the Gallic youths were sent to the Druidic colleges in Britain for their philosophical instructional and training. The Archdruid in his ceremonial robes. From Wellcome's Ancient Cymric Medicine, the most striking adornment of the Archdruid was the Iodon Moran, or breastplate of judgment, which possessed the mysterious power of strangling any who made an untrue statement while wearing it. Godfrey Higgins states that this breastplate was put on the necks of witnesses to test the veracity of their evidence. The Druidic Tiara, or anguinum, its front embossed with a number of points to represent the sun's rays, indicated that the priest was a personification of the rising sun. On the front of his belt, the Archdruid wore the Liath Meshith, a magic brooch or buckle in the center of which was a large white stone. To this was attributed the power of drawing the fire of the gods down from heaven at the priest's command. This specially cut stone was a burning glass by which the sun's rays were concentrated to light the altar fires. The Druids also had other symbolic implements, such as the peculiarly shaped golden sickle with which they cut the mistletoe from the oak, and the cornon, or scepter, in the form of a crescent, symbolic of the 6th day of the increasing moon, and also of the Ark of Noah. An early initiate of the Druidic mysteries related that admission to their midnight ceremony was gained by means of a glass boat called Surig Gridrin. This boat symbolized the moon, which, floating upon the waters of eternity, preserved the seeds of living creatures within its boat-like crescent. Eliphas Levi states that the Druids lived in strict abstinence, studied the natural sciences, preserved the deepest secrecy, and admitted new members only after long probationary periods. Many of the priests of the order lived in buildings not unlike the monasteries of the modern world. They were associated in groups like ascetics of the Far East. Although celibacy was not demanded of them, few married. Many of the Druids retired from the world and lived as recluses in caves, in rough stone houses, or in little shacks built in the depths of a forest. Here they prayed and meditated, emerging only to perform their religious duties. James Freeman Clarke, in his 10 Great Religions, described the beliefs of the Druids as follows. The Druids believed in 3 worlds and in transmigration from one to the other. In a world above this, in which happiness predominated, a world below of misery and this present state. This transmigration was to punish and reward and also to purify the soul. In the present world, said they, good and evil are so exactly balanced that man has the utmost freedom and is able to choose or reject either. The Welsh triads tell us there are 3 objects of metempsychosis: to collect into the soul the properties of all being, to acquire a knowledge of all things, and to get power to conquer evil. There are also, they say, 3 kinds of knowledge: knowledge of the nature of each thing, of its cause, and its influence. There are 3 things which continually grow less: darkness, falsehood, and death. There are 3 which constantly increase: light, life, and truth. Like nearly all schools of the mysteries, the teachings of the Druids were divided into 2 distinct sections. The simpler, a moral code, was taught to all the people, while the deeper esoteric doctrine was given only to initiated priests. To be admitted to the order, a candidate was required to be of good family and of high moral character. No important secrets were entrusted to him until he had been tempted in many ways and his strength of character severely tried. The Druids taught the people of Britain and Gaul concerning the immortality of the soul. They believed in transmigration and apparently in reincarnation. They borrowed in one life, promising to pay back in the next. They believed in a purgatorial type of hell where they would be purged of their sins, afterwards passing on to the happiness of unity with the gods. The Druids taught that all men would be saved, but that some must return to earth many times to learn the lessons of human life and to overcome the inherent evil of their own natures. Before a candidate was entrusted with the secret doctrines of the Druids, he was bound with the vow of secrecy. These doctrines were imparted only in the depths of forests and in the darkness of caves. In these places, far from the haunts of men, the neophyte was instructed concerning the creation of the universe, the personalities of the gods, the laws of nature, the secrets of occult medicine, the mysteries of the celestial bodies, and the rudiments of magic and sorcery. The Druids had a great number of feast days. The new and full moon and the 6th day of the moon were sacred periods. It is believed that initiations took place only at the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes. At dawn of the 25th day of December, the birth of the sun god was celebrated. The secret teachings of the Druids are said by some to be tinctured with Pythagorean philosophy. The Druids had a Madonna, or Virgin Mother, with a child in her arms who was sacred to their mysteries, and their sun god was resurrected at the time of the year corresponding to that at which modern Christians celebrate Easter. Both the cross and the serpent were sacred to the Druids, who made the former by cutting off all the branches of an oak tree and fastening one of them to the main trunk in the form of the letter T. This oaken cross became symbolic of their superior deity. They also worshiped the sun, moon, and stars. The moon received their special veneration. Caesar stated that Mercury was one of their chief deities of the Gauls. The Druids are believed to have worshipped Mercury under the similitude of a stone cube. They also had great veneration for the nature spirits, fairies, gnomes, and undines, little creatures of the forest and rivers to whom many offerings were made. Describing the temples of the Druids, Charles Hecthorne, in the Secret Societies of All Ages and Countries, says, their temples wherein the sacred fire was preserved were generally situate on eminences and in dense groves of oak, and assumed various forms, circular because a circle was the emblem of the universe, oval an allusion to the mundane egg from which issued, according to the traditions of many nations, the universe, or according to others, our first parents, serpentine because a serpent was the symbol of hue, the Druidic Osiris, cruciform because a cross is an emblem of regeneration, or winged to represent the motion of the divine spirit. Their chief deities were reducible to two, a male and a female, the great father and mother, Hu and Ceridwen, distinguished by the same characteristics as belong to Osiris and Isis, Bacchus and Ceres, or any other supreme god and goddess, representing the two principles of all being. Godfrey Higgins states that Hugh the Mighty, regarded as the first settler of Britain, came from a place which the Welsh triads called the Summer Country, the present site of Constantinople. Albert Pike says that the lost word of masonry is concealed in the name of the Druid god Hugh. The meager information extant concerning the secret initiations of the Druids indicates a decided similarity between their mystery school and the schools of Greece and Egypt. Hu, the sun god, was murdered and, after a number of strange ordeals and mystic rituals, was restored to life. There were 3 degrees of the Druidic mysteries, but few successfully passed them all. The candidate was buried in a coffin as symbolic of the death of the sun god. The supreme test, however, was being sent out to sea in an open boat. While undergoing this ordeal, many lost their lives. Taliesin, an ancient scholar who passed through the mysteries, describes the initiation of the open boat and favors pagan idolatry. The few who passed this 3rd degree were said to have been born again and were instructed in the secret and hidden truths which the Druid priest had preserved from antiquity. From these initiates were chosen many of the dignitaries of the British religious and political world. For further details, see Faber's Pagan Idolatry, Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, and Godfrey Higgins' Celtic Druids. The Rites of Mithras. When the Persian mysteries immigrated into southern Europe, they were quickly assimilated by the Latin mind. The cult grew rapidly, especially among the Roman soldiery, and during the Roman wars of conquest, the teachings were carried by the legionaries to nearly all parts of Europe. So powerful did the cult of Mithras become that at least one Roman emperor was initiated into the order, which met in caverns under the city of Rome. Concerning the spread of this mystery school through different parts of Europe, C.W. King, in his Gnostics and Their Remains, says, Mithraic bas-reliefs cut on the faces of rocks or on stone tablets still abound in the countries formerly the western provinces of the Roman Empire. Many exist in Germany, still more in France, and in this island, Britain. They have often been discovered on the line of the Picts wall and the noted one at Bath. Alexander Wilder, in his Philosophy and Ethics of the Zoroasters, states that Mithras is the Zend title for the sun, and he is supposed to dwell within that shining orb. Mithras has a male and a female aspect, though not himself androgynous. As Mithras, he is the Ford of the sun, powerful and radiant, and most magnificent of the Yazatas, Izaz, or genii of the sun. As Mithra, this deity represents the feminine principle. The mundane universe is recognized as her symbol. She represents nature as receptive and terrestrial, and as fruitful only when bathed in the glory of the solar orb. The Mithraic cult is a simplification of the more elaborate teachings of Zoroaster, the Persian fire magician. The ground plan of Stonehenge, from Maurice's Indian Antiquities. The Druid temples of places of religious worship were not patterned after those of other nations. Most of their ceremonies were performed at night, either in thick groves of oak trees or around open-air altars built of great uncut stones. How these masses of rock were moved has not been satisfactorily explained. The most famous of their altars, a great stone ring of rocks, is Stonehenge in southwestern England. This structure, laid out on an astronomical basis, still stands, a wonder of antiquity. According to the Persians, there coexisted in eternity two principles. The first of these, Ahura Mazda or Ormuzd, was the spirit of good. From Ormuzd came forth a number of hierarchies of good and beautiful spirits, angels and archangels. The second of these eternally existing principles was called Ahriman. He was also a pure and beautiful spirit, but he later rebelled against Ormuzd, being jealous of his power. This did not occur, however, until after Ormuzd had created light, for previously Ahriman had not been conscious of the existence of Ormuzd. Because of his jealousy and rebellion, Ahriman became the spirit of evil. From himself, he individualized a host of destructive creatures to injure Ormuzd. When Ormuzd created the earth, Ahriman entered into his grosser elements. Whenever Ormuzd did a good deed, Ahriman placed the principle of evil within it. At last, when Ormuzd created the human race, Ahriman became incarnate in the lower nature of man, so that in each personality, the spirit of good and the spirit of evil struggle for control. For 3,000 years, Ormuzd ruled the celestial worlds with light and goodness. Then he created man. For another 3,000 years, he ruled man with wisdom and integrity. Then the power of Ahriman began, and the struggle for the soul of man continues through the next period of 3,000 years. During the fourth period of 3,000 years, the power of Ahriman will be destroyed. Good will return to the world again, evil and death will be vanquished, and at last the spirit of evil will bow humbly before the throne of Ormuzd. While Ormuzd and Ahriman are struggling for control of the human soul and for supremacy in nature, Mithras, god of intelligence, stands as mediator between the two. Many authors have noted the similarity between Mercury and Mithras. As the chemical mercury acts as a solvent, according to alchemists, so Mithras seeks to harmonize the two celestial opposites. There are many points of resemblance between Christianity and the cult of Mithras. One of the reasons for this probably is that the Persian mystics invaded Italy during the 1st century after Christ, and the early history of both cults was closely interwoven. The Encyclopedia Britannica makes the following statement concerning the Mithraic and Christian mysteries. The fraternal and democratic spirit of the first communities and their humble origin, the identification of the object of adoration with light and the sun, the legends of the shepherds with their gifts and adoration, the flood and the ark, the representation in art of the fiery chariot, the drawing of water from the rock, the use of bale and candle, holy water and the communion, the sanctification of Sunday and of the 25th of December, the insistence on moral conduct, the emphasis placed on abstinence and self-control, the doctrine of heaven and hell, of primitive revelation, of the mediation of the logos emanating from the divine, the atoning sacrifice, the constant warfare between good and evil, and the final triumph of the former, the immortality of the soul, the last judgment, the resurrection of the flesh, and the fiery destruction of the universe. These are some of the resemblances which, whether real or only apparent, enabled Mithraism to prolong its resistance to Christianity. Mithras slaying the bull. From Lundy's Monumental Christianity. The most famous sculpturings and reliefs of this prototokos show Mithras kneeling upon the recumbent form of a great bull into whose throat he is driving a sword. The slaying of the bull signifies that the rays of the sun, symbolized by the sword, release at the vernal equinox the vital essences of the earth, the blood of the bull, which, pouring from the wound made by the sun god, fertilized the seeds of living things. Dogs were held sacred to the cult of Mithras, being symbolic of sincerity and trustworthiness. The Mithraics used the serpent as an emblem of Ahriman, the spirit of evil, and water rats were held sacred to him. The bull is esoterically the constellation of Taurus. The serpent, its opposite in the zodiac, Scorpio. The sun, Mithras, entering into the side of the bull, slays the celestial creature and nourishes the universe with its blood. The rites of Mithras were performed in caves. Porphyry, in his Cave of the Nymphs, states that Zarathustra or Zoroaster was the first to consecrate a cave to the worship of God because a cavern was symbolic of the earth or the lower world of darkness. John P. Lundy, in his Monumental Christianity, describes the Cave of Mithras as follows. But this cave was adorned with the signs of the zodiac, Cancer and Capricorn. The summer and winter solstices were chiefly conspicuous as the gates of souls descending into this life or passing out of it in their ascent to the gods. Cancer being the gate of descent and Capricorn of ascent. These are the two avenues of the immortals passing up and down from earth to heaven and from heaven to earth. The so-called chair of St. Peter in Rome was believed to have been used in one of the pagan mysteries, possibly that of Mithras, in whose subterranean grottos the votaries of the Christian mysteries met in the early days of their faith. In Anacalypsis, Godfrey Higgins writes that in 1662, while cleaning this sacred chair of Bar Jonas, the 12 labors of Hercules were discovered upon it, and that later the French discovered upon the same chair the Mohammedan Confession of Faith written in Arabic. Initiation into the rites of Mithras, like initiation into many other ancient schools of philosophy, apparently consisted of 3 important degrees. Preparation for these degrees consisted of self-purification, the building up of the intellectual powers, and the control of the animal nature. In the first degree, the candidate was given a crown upon the point of a sword and instructed in the mysteries of Mithras' hidden power. Probably he was taught that the golden crown represented his own spiritual nature, which must be objectified and unfolded before he could truly glorify Mithras. Mithras was his own soul, standing as mediator between Ormus, his spirit, and Ahriman, his animal nature. In the second degree, he was given the armor of intelligence and purity and sent into the darkness of subterranean pits to fight the beast of lust, passion, and degeneracy. In the third degree, he was given a cape upon which were drawn or woven the signs of the zodiac and other astronomical symbols. After his initiations were over, he was held as one who had raised from the dead, who was instructed in the secret teachings of the Persian mystics, and became a full-fledged member of the order. Candidates who successfully passed the Mithraic initiations were called lions and were marked upon their foreheads with the Egyptian cross. Mithras himself is often pictured with the head of a lion and 2 pairs of wings. Throughout the entire ritual were repeated references to the birth of Mithras as the sun god, his sacrifice for man, his death that men might have eternal life, and lastly, his resurrection and the saving of all humanity by his intercession before the throne of Ormuzd. While the cult of Mithras did not reach the philosophic heights attained by Zarathustra, its effect upon the civilization of the Western world was far-reaching, for at one time nearly all Europe was converted to its doctrines. Rome, in her intercourse with other nations, inoculated them with her religious principles, and many later institutions have exhibited Mithraic culture. The reference to the lion and the grip of the lion's paw in the Master Mason's degree have a strong Mithraic tinge and may easily have originated from this cult. A ladder of 7 rungs appears in the Mithraic initiation. Faber is one of the opinion that this ladder was originally a pyramid of 7 steps. It is possible that the Masonic ladder with 7 rungs had its origin in this Mithraic symbol. Women were never permitted to enter the Mithraic order, but children of the male sex were initiates long before they reached maturity. The refusal to permit women to join the Masonic order may be based on the esoteric reason given in the secret instructions of the Mithraics. This cult is another excellent example of those secret societies whose legends are largely symbolic representations of the sun and his journey through the houses of the heavens. Mithras, rising from a stone, is merely the sun rising over the horizon, or, as the ancients supposed, out of the horizon at the vernal equinox. The birth of Mithras, from Montfaucon's Antiquities. Mithras was born out of a rock, which, breaking open, permitted him to emerge. This occurred in the darkness of a subterranean chamber. The Church of the Nativity at Bethlehem confirms the theory that Jesus was born in a grotto or cave. According to Dupuis, Mithras was put to death by crucifixion and rose again on the 3rd day. John O'Neill disputes the theory that Mithras was intended as a solar deity. In the Night of the Gods, he writes, the Avestan Mithra, the Yazada of light, has 10,000 eyes high, with full knowledge, Parathuvedayana, strong, sleepless, and ever awake, Jog Harv Von Gem, the supreme god Ahura Mazda, also has one eye, or else it is said that with his eyes, the sun, moon, and stars, he sees everything. The theory that Mithra was originally a title of the supreme heavens god, putting the sun out of court, is the only one that answers all requirements. It will be evident that here we have origins in abundance for the Freemason's eye and its non quam dormio. The reader must nor confuse the Persian Mithra with the Vedic Mitra. According to Alexander Wilder, the Mithraic rites superseded the mysteries of Bacchus and became the foundation of the Gnostic system, which for many centuries prevailed in Asia, Egypt, and even the remote West. The Ancient Mysteries and Secret Societies, Part 2. The entire history of Christian and pagan Gnosticism is shrouded in the deepest mystery and obscurity. For, while the Gnostics were undoubtedly prolific writers, little of their literature has survived. They brought down upon themselves the animosity of the early Christian church, and when this institution reached its position of world power, it destroyed all available records of the Gnostic cultists. The name Gnostic means wisdom or knowledge and is derived from the Greek gnosis. The members of the order claimed to be familiar with the secret doctrines of early Christianity. They interpreted the Christian mysteries according to pagan symbolism. Their secret information and philosophic tenets they concealed from the profane and taught to a small group only of especially initiated persons. Simon Magus, the magician of the New Testament fame, is often supposed to have been the founder of Gnosticism. If this be true, the sect was formed during the century after Christ and is probably the first of the many branches which have sprung from the main trunk of Christianity. Everything with which the enthusiasts of the early Christian church might not agree, they declared to be inspired by the devil. That Simon Magus had mysterious and supernatural powers is conceded even by his enemies, but they maintained that these powers were lent to him by the infernal spirits and furies, which they asserted were his ever-present companions. Undoubtedly, the most interesting legend concerning Simon is that which tells of his theosophic contest with the Apostle Peter while the two were promulgating their differing doctrines in Rome. According to the story that the church fathers have preserved, Simon was to prove his spiritual superiority by ascending to heaven in a chariot of fire. He was actually picked up and carried many feet into the air by invisible powers. When St. Peter saw this, he cried out in a loud voice, ordering the demons, the spirits of the air, to release their hold upon the magician. The evil spirits, when so ordered by the great saint, were forced to obey. Simon fell a great distance and was killed, which decisively proved the superiority of the Christian powers. This story is undoubtedly manufactured out of whole cloth, as it is only one out of many accounts concerning his death, few of which agree. As more and more evidence is amassed to the effect that St. Peter was never in Rome, its last possible vestige of authenticity is rapidly being dissipated. That Simon was a philosopher, there is no doubt, for wherever his exact words are preserved, his synthetic and transcending thoughts are beautifully expressed. The principles of Gnosticism are well described in the following verbatim statement by him, supposed to have been preserved by Hippolytus. To you, therefore, I say what I say and write what I write. And the writing is this: of the universal eons, periods, planes, or cycles of creative and created life in substance and space, celestial creatures, there are two shoots without beginning or end, springing from one root, which is the power invisible, inapprehensible silence, Vithos. Of these shoots, one is manifested from above, which is the great power, the universal mind ordering all things, male, and the other is manifested from below, the great thought, female, producing all things. Hence, pairing with each other, they unite and manifest the middle distance, incomprehensible air, without beginning or end. In this is the Father who sustains all things and nourishes those things which have a beginning and end. The death of Simon the magician, from the Nuremberg Chronicle. Simon Magus, having called upon the spirits of the air, is here shown being picked up by the demons. St. Peter demands that the evil genii release their hold upon the magician. The demons are forced to comply, and Simon Magus is killed by the fall. By this, we are to understand that manifestation is the result of a positive and a negative principle, one acting upon the other, and it takes place in the middle plane, or point of equilibrium, called the pleroma. This pleroma is a peculiar substance produced out of the blending of the spiritual and material eons. Out of the pleroma was individualized the demiurgus, the immortal mortal, to whom we are responsible for our physical existence and the suffering we must go through in connection with it. In the Gnostic system, 3 pairs of opposites called Sigis emanated from the Eternal One. These with himself make the total of 7. The 6, 3 pairs, eons, living divine principles, were described by Simon in the Philosophumena in the following manner. The first 2 were mind, nous, and thought, opinio. Then came voice, phone, and its opposite, name, onoma. And lastly, reason, logismos, and reflection, enthymsis. From these primordial 6 united the eternal flame, came forth the eons, angels, who formed the lower worlds through the direction of the demiurges. How this first Gnosticism of Simon Magus and Menander, his disciple, was amplified and frequently distorted by later adherents to the cult must now be considered. The school of Gnosticism was divided into 2 major parts, commonly called the Syrian Cult and the Alexandrian Cult. These schools agreed in essentials, but the latter division was more inclined to be pantheistic, while the former was dualistic. While the Syrian cult was largely Simonian, the Alexandrian school was the outgrowth of the philosophical deductions of a clever Egyptian Christian, Basilides by name, who claimed to have received his instructions from the Apostle Matthew. Like Simon Magus, he was an emanationist with Neoplatonic inclinations. In fact, the entire Gnostic mystery is based upon the hypothesis of emanations as being the logical connection between the irreconcilable opposites, absolute spirit and absolute substance, which the Gnostics believed to have been coexistent in eternity. Some assert that Basilides was the true founder of Gnosticism, but there is much evidence to the effect that Simon Magus laid down its fundamental principles in the preceding century. The Alexandrian Basilides, whatever, inculcated Egyptian Hermeticism, Oriental occultism, Chaldean astrology, and Persian philosophy in his followers, and in his doctrines sought to unite the schools of early Christianity with the ancient pagan mysteries. To him is attributed the formulation of that peculiar concept of the deity which carries the name of Abraxas. In discussing the original meaning of this word, Godfrey Higgins, in his Celtic Druids, has demonstrated that the numerological powers of the letters forming the word Abraxas, when added together, result in the sum of 365. The same author also notes that the name Mithras, when treated in a similar manner, has the same numerical value. Basilides caught that the powers of the universe were divided into 365 eons, or spiritual cycles, and that the sum of all these together was the Supreme Father, and to him he gave the Kabbalistical appellation of Abraxas as being symbolical, numerologically, of his divine powers, attributes, and emanations. Abraxas is usually symbolized as a composite creature with the body of a human being and the head of a rooster, and with each of his legs ending in a serpent. C.W. King, in his Gnostics and Their Remains, gives the following concise description of the Gnostic philosophy of Basilides. quoting from the writings of the early Christian bishop and martyr Saint Irenaeus. He asserted that God, the uncreated, eternal Father, had first brought forth nous, or mind. This, the logos word, this again, phronesis, intelligence. From phronesis sprung Sophia, wisdom, and dynamis, strength. In describing Abraxas, C.W. King says, Bellarmine considers the composite image inscribed with the actual name Abraxas to be a Gnostic pantheos, representing the supreme being with the 5 emanations marked out by appropriate symbols. From the human body, the usual form assigned to the deity, spring the 2 supporters, nous and logos, expressed in the serpents, symbols of the inner senses and the quickening understanding, on which account the Greeks had made the serpent the attribute of Pallas. His head, that of a cock, represents phronesis, that bird being the emblem of foresight and of vigilance. His 2 arms hold the symbols of Sophia and dynamis, the shield of wisdom and the whip of power. The lion-faced light power. From the Montfaucon's Antiquities. This Gnostic gem represents by its serpentine body the pathway of the sun, and by its lion head the exaltation of the solar in the constellation of Leo. The Gnostics were divided in their opinions concerning the demiurgus, or creator of the lower worlds. He established the terrestrial universe with the aid of 6 suns, or emanations, possibly the planetary angels, which he formed out of and yet within himself. As stated before, the demiurgus was individualized as the lowest creation out of the substance called pleroma. One group of the Gnostics was of the opinion that the demiurgus was the cause of all misery and was an evil creature who, by building this lower world, had separated the souls of men from truth by encasing them in mortal vehicles. The other sect viewed the demiurgus as being divinely inspired and merely fulfilling the dictates of the invisible Lord. Some Gnostics were of the opinion that the Jewish god Jehovah was the demiurgus. This concept, under a slightly different name, apparently influenced medieval Rosicrucianism, which viewed Jehovah as the Lord of the material universe rather than as the supreme deity. Mythology abounds with the stories of gods who partook of both celestial and terrestrial natures. Odin of Scandinavia is a good example of a deity subject to mortality, bowing before the laws of nature and yet being, in certain senses at least, a supreme deity. The Gnostic viewpoint concerning the Christ is well worthy of consideration. This order claimed to be the only sect to have actual pictures of the divine Syrian. While these were, in all probability, idealistic conceptions of the Savior based upon existing sculpturings and paintings of the pagan sun gods, they were all Christianity had. To the Gnostics, the Christ was the personification of nous, the divine mind, and emanated from the higher spiritual eons. He descended into the body of Jesus at the baptism and left it again before the crucifixion. The Gnostics declared that the Christ was not crucified, as the divine nous could not suffer death, but that Simon the Cyrenian offered his life instead, and that the nous, by means of its power, caused Simon to resemble Jesus. Irenaeus makes the following statement concerning the cosmic sacrifice of the Christ. When the uncreated, unnamed Father saw the corruption of mankind, he sent his firstborn nous into the world in the form of Christ for the redemption of all who believe in him, out of the power of those that have fabricated the world, the demiurgus and his 6 sons, the planetary genii. He appeared amongst men as the man Jesus and wrought miracles. See Kings, Gnostics, and their remains. The Gnostics divided humanity into 3 parts: those who, as savages, worshipped only the visible nature, those who, like the Jews, worshipped the demiurgus, and lastly, themselves or others of a similar cult, including certain sects of Christians who worship Nos or Christ and the true spiritual light of the higher eons. After the death of Basilides, Valentinus became the leading inspiration of the Gnostic movement. He still further complicated the system of Gnostic philosophy by adding infinitely to the details. He increased the number of emanations from the Great One, the Abyss, to 15 pairs, and also laid much emphasis on the Virgin Sophia, or wisdom. In the books of the Savior, parts of which are commonly known as the Pistis Sophia, may be found much material concerning this strange doctrine of eons and their strange inhabitants. James Freeman Clarke, in speaking of the doctrines of the Gnostics, says, "These doctrines, strange as they seem to us, had a wide influence in the Christian church. Many of the theories of the ancient Gnostics, especially those concerning scientific subjects, have been substantiated by modern research. Several sects branched off from the main stem of Gnosticism, such as the Valentinians, the Ophites, or the serpent worshippers, and the Adamites. After the 3rd century, their power waned, and the Gnostics practically vanished from the philosophic world. An effort was made during the Middle Ages to resurrect the principles of Gnosticism, but owing to the destruction of their records, the material necessary was not available. Even today, there are evidences of Gnostic philosophy in the modern world, but they bear other names and their true origin is not suspected. Many of the Gnostic concepts have actually been incorporated into the dogmas of the Christian church, and our newer interpretations of Christianity are often along the lines of Gnostic emanationism. The mysteries of Asarhapi. The identity of the Greco-Egyptian Serapis, known to the Greeks as Serapis and the Egyptians as Asarhapi, is shrouded by an impenetrable veil of mystery. While this deity was a familiar figure among the symbols of the secret Egyptian initiatory rites, his arcane nature was revealed only to those who had fulfilled the requirements of the Seraphic cultus. Therefore, in all probability, excepting the initiated priest, the Egyptians themselves were ignorant of his true character. So far as known, there exists no authentic account of the rites of Serapis, but an analysis of the deity and his accompanying symbols reveals their salient points. In an oracle delivered to the king of Cyprus, Serapis described himself thus: "A god I am such as I show to thee. The starry heavens are my head, my trunk the sea. Earth forms my feet, mine ears the air supplies. The sun's far darting brilliant rays, mine eyes." Several unsatisfactory attempts have been made to etymologize the word Serapis. Godfrey Higgins notes that Soros was the name given by the Egyptians to a stone coffin, and Apis was Osiris incarnate in the sacred bull. These 2 words combined result in Soros Apis or Sorapis, the tomb of the bull. but it is improbable that the Egyptians would worship a coffin in the form of a man. Several ancient authors, including Macrobius, have affirmed that Serapis was a name for the sun because his image so often had a halo of light about its head. In his oration upon the sovereign sun, Julian speaks of the deity in these words: one Jove, one Pluto, one sun is Serapis. In Hebrew, Serapis is Seraph, meaning to blaze out or to blaze up. For this reason, the Jews designated one of their hierarchies of spiritual beings seraphim. The most common theory, however, regarding the origin of the name Serapis is that which traces its derivation from the compound Osiris Apis. At one time, the Egyptians believed that the dead were absorbed into the nature of Osiris, the god of the dead. While marked similarity exists between Osiris Apis and Serapis, the theory advanced by Egyptologists that Serapis, merely a name given to the dead Apis or sacred bull of Egypt, is untenable in view of the transcendent wisdom possessed by the Egyptian priestcraft, who in all probability used the god to symbolize the soul of the world, anima mundi. The material body of nature was called Apis, the soul, which escaped from the body at death, but was enmeshed with the form during physical life, was designated Serapis. The Alexandrian Serapis, from Moses' History der Hebräischen Kirche. Serapis is often shown standing on the back of the sacred crocodile, carrying in his left hand a rule with which to measure the inundations of the Nile, and balancing with his right hand a curious emblem consisting of an animal with the heads. The first head, that of a lion, signified the present, the second head, that of a wolf, the past, and the third head, that of a dog, the future. The body with its three heads was enveloped by the twisted coils of a serpent. Figures of Serapis are occasionally accompanied by Cerberus, the three-headed dog of Pluto, and, like Jupiter, carry baskets of grain upon their heads. C.W. King believes Serapis to be a deity of Brahmanic extraction, his name being the Grecianized form of Sarada, or Shripa, two titles ascribed to Yama, the Hindu god of death. This appears reasonable, especially since there is a legend to the effect that Serapis, in the form of a bull, was driven by Bacchus from India to Egypt. The priority of the Hindu mysteries would further substantiate such a theory. Among other meanings suggested for the word Serapis are the sacred bull, the sun in Taurus, the soul of Osiris, the sacred serpent, and the retiring of the bull. The last appellation has reference to the ceremony of drowning the sacred Apis in the waters of the Nile every 25 years. There is considerable evidence that the famous statue of Serapis in the Serapeum at Alexandria was originally worshipped under another name at Sinope, from which it was brought to Alexandria. There is also a legend which tells that Serapis was a very early king of the Egyptians, to whom they owed the foundation of their philosophical and scientific power. After his death, this king was elevated to the estate of a god. Phylarchus declared that the word Serapis means the power that disposed the universe into its present beautiful order. In his Isis and Osiris, Plutarch gives the following account of the origin of the magnificent statue of Serapis, which stood in the Serapeum at Alexandria. While he was a pharaoh of Egypt, Ptolemy Soter had a strange dream in which he beheld a tremendous statue which came to life and ordered the pharaoh to bring it to Alexandria with all possible speed. Ptolemy Soter, not knowing the whereabouts of the statue, was sorely perplexed as to how he could discover it. While the pharaoh was relating his dream, a great traveler by the name of Sistahs, coming forward, declared that he had seen such an image at Sinope. The pharaoh immediately dispatched Sotiles and Dionysius to negotiate for the removal of the figure to Alexandria. 3 years elapsed before the image was finally obtained, the representatives of the pharaoh finally stealing it and concealing the theft by spreading the story that the statue had come to life and, walking down the street leading from its temple, had boarded the ship prepared for its transportation to Alexandria. Upon its arrival in Egypt, the figure was brought into the presence of 2 Egyptian initiates, the Eumolpid Timotheus and Manetho the Sibonite, who immediately pronounced it to be Serapis. The priest then declared that it was equivalent to Pluto. This was a masterly stroke, for in Serapis the Greeks and Egyptians found a deity in common, and thus religious unity was consummated between the 2 nations. Several figures of Serapis that stood in his various temples in Egypt and Rome have been described by early authors. Nearly all these showed Grecian rather than Egyptian influence. In some, the body of the god was encircled by the coils of a great serpent. Others showed him as a composite of Osiris and Apis. A description of the god that in all probability is reasonably accurate is that which represents him as a tall, powerful figure conveying the twofold impression of manly strength and womanly grace. His face portrayed a deeply pensive mood, the expression inclining toward sadness. His hair was long and arranged in a somewhat feminine manner, resting in curls upon his breast and shoulders. The face, save for its heavy beard, was also decidedly feminine. The figure of Serapis was usually robed from head to foot in heavy draperies, believed by initiates to conceal the fact that his body was androgynous. Various substances were used in making the statues of Serapis. Some undoubtedly were carved from stone or marble by skilled craftsmen. Others may have been cast from base or precious metals. One colossus of Serapis was composed of plates of various metals fitted together. In a labyrinth sacred to Serapis stood a 13-foot statue of him, reputed to have been made from a single emerald. Modern writers discussing this image state that it was made of green glass poured into a mold. According to Egyptians, however, it withstood all the tests of an actual emerald. Clement of Alexandria describes a figure of Serapis compounded from the following elements. First, fillings of gold, silver, lead, and tin. Second, all manner of Egyptian stones, including sapphires, hematites, emeralds, and topazes. All these being ground down and mixed together with the coloring matter left over from the funeral of Osiris and Apis. The result was a rare and curious figure, indigo in color. Some of the statues of Serapis must have been formed of extremely hard substances, for when a Christian soldier carrying out the edict of Theodosius struck the Alexandrian Serapis with his axe, that instrument was shattered into fragments and sparks flew from it. It is also quite probable that Serapis was worshipped in the form of a serpent, in common with many of the higher deities of the Egyptian and Greek pantheons. Serapis was called Theon Heptagrammaton, or the god with the name of 7 letters. The name Serapis, like Abraxas and Mithras, contained 7 letters. In their hymns to Serapis, the priests chanted the 7 vows. Occasionally, Serapis is depicted with horns or a coronet of 7 rays. These evidently represented the 7 divine intelligences manifesting through the solar light. The Encyclopedia Britannica notes that the earliest authentic mention of Serapis is in connection with the death of Alexander. Such was the prestige of Serapis that he alone of the gods was consulted in behalf of the dying king. The Egyptian secret school of philosophy was divided into the lesser and the greater mysteries, the former being sacred to Isis and the latter to Serapis and Osiris. Wilkinson is of the opinion that only the priests were permitted to enter the greater mysteries. Even the heir to the throne was not eligible until he had been crowned pharaoh, when, by virtue of his kingly office, he automatically became a priest and the temporal head of the state of religion. A limited number were admitted into the greater mysteries. These preserved their secrets inviolate. Much of the information concerning the rituals of the higher degrees of the Egyptian mysteries has been gleaned from an examination of the chambers and passageways in which the initiations were given. Under the temple of Serapis, destroyed by Theodosius, were found strange mechanical contrivances constructed by the priest in the subterranean crypts and caverns where the nocturnal initiatory rites were celebrated. These machines indicate the severe test of moral and physical courage undergone by the candidates. After passing through these torturous ways, the neophytes who survived the ordeals were ushered into the presence of Serapis, a noble and awe-inspiring figure illumined by unseen lights. Okay, and we're gonna end it here for the night. Stay tuned for the next chapter, A Symbolic Labyrinth. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you guys in the next video. Peace. Shalom. Shalom.